They arrived in chains, a line of weary, bruised, and disheartened human soldiers being marched through the Pharaoh-Crete corridors of the Threska Dominion's high separate prison complex on the planet Illyria. Interstellar law had once protected human prisoners of war, but the Dominion had little use for treaties now that their might was unchallenged by confederations of old. Each soldier had arrived via a cramped cargo hold on a Dominion transport, flanked by insectoid Threscan guards whose exoskeletons glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. Human troopers tried to keep their heads high, but the shame of defeat bore down on them. They had once fought valiantly for Earth and her colonies, only to be overwhelmed by the superior numbers and technology of Threscan battle groups. Over 1,000 of them had been taken that day, and these few dozen were the survivors deemed dangerous enough to be exiled to the Illyrian prison planet. Confiscated rifles and plasma pistols were replaced by heavy metal shackles. The Threscans, bipedal arthropods with multifaceted eyes, relished in subduing those who had resisted the hardest during the battles. An unspoken tension vibrated through the corridor. No one knew if they would be lined up and shot or tossed into labor camp. The atmosphere reeked of desperation, yet flickers of defiance lingered in the humans' eyes. Some of them had hidden injuries behind stoic expressions, refusing to give the satisfaction of seeing defeat. One among them, Lieutenant Sophia Reyes, caught the stare of a tall Threscan guard. She did not flinch. The guard hissed, before nudging her forward with the butt of his particle rifle, making her stumble. The clang of her chains was a discordant drumbeat of captivity echoing through the hall. The path opened into a wide, domed chamber where other prisoners, both human and from other star systems, stood in tattered uniforms, their eyes locked onto the new arrivals with a mixture of fear and hope. Sophia's gaze swept over them, catching glimpses of orange jumpsuits, makeshift bandages, and the haggard faces of individuals who had been here far longer than she had. Razor wire fences separated various cell blocks, each block dedicated to a different species, though the Threscans' attempt to split them up did nothing to quell the shared frustration and sense of injustice. The room was a cacophony of pain, guarded by an array of automated turrets perched in shadowed corners. At the slightest provocation, the whir of those turrets would target the offender with lethal efficiency. The newly arrived captives were shepherded deeper into the complex, forced to pass rows of detainees who occupied cold metal bunks stacked 3 high. A few whispered greetings, while others looked away, their spirits broken long ago. The Dominion's reputation for cruelty was well known. Forced labor, psychological torture, and the occasional public execution kept the prison population in fearful compliance. The stories were enough to dampen the boldest intentions. Still, a spark of resilience flickered within Sophia and many of her comrades. By the time they were herded into a cramped holding cell, they had vowed wordlessly. They would endure, and if any opportunity arose, they would fight back. In the following weeks, life fell into a routine of misery. The humans were assigned to construction shifts, building out new fortifications for the Dominion's planned expansion. Illyria was a fortress world from which the Threscans launched campaigns to other star systems. Yet their thirst for control did not merely aim for territories. They wanted subjugation, ensuring no potential resistance remained anywhere in the galaxy. The prisoners were marched out, under burning suns, to pour steel foundations, assemble artillery platforms, and load starship cargo without rest. Sophia noticed the variety of species toiling under the Dominion's lash. Slender reptilians from the outer rim, the fierce but docile cat-like Vinterans who had once ruled a portion of the sector, and even the rumored crystalline species known as Trellians. Somehow, the Threscans, with their cunning manipulation and mass-produced warships, had conquered entire star clusters. Now this forced labor was fueling their unstoppable expansion. Though spoken language varied, the universal language of suffering flattened the barriers between these species. After each grueling shift, the prisoners were shuffled back to the prison blocks for a meal of synthetic paste. While many collapsed into restless sleep the moment they returned, Sophia and a few of her fellow humans began to forge silent relationships with the other species. They shared bits of contraband medicines, traded stories of lost battles, and gained trust. Over time, what started as small, private gestures grew into a loose network of alliances. Sophia would quietly help bandage the twisted ankle of a Vinteran soldier who, in turn, would share scraps of data about Dominion patrol routes. A Trillian, whose bioluminescent crystals glowed faintly in the darkness, would pass coded signals to an elderly human scientist who was constructing a makeshift relay device out of salvaged components. One night, after lights out, Sophia held a whispered conversation with her closest confidants, Sergeant Noah Barnes, a broad-shouldered man whose short-cropped hair and tired eyes spoke volumes about his experiences, and Corporal Wei Zhang, a reserved tactical genius who had once orchestrated spaceborne infiltration missions. They huddled around a dimly lit corner of their cell, faces partially obscured by the gloom. The plan they began to formulate was risky at best, suicidal at worst. Sophia's hushed words carried a grim determination. If they kept waiting, they would die on this barren rock, or end up slaves to the Dominion's will. If they acted, there was at least a slim chance to fight for freedom. Gathering secrets became the first step. Under the watchful eyes of the Thraskans, the humans and their newfound allies began collecting details. How many guards manned the watchtowers? Where did the supply routes come from? Which starships were arriving or departing, and when? Bit by bit, they built a mosaic of intelligence that hinted at possibilities for sabotage and escape. The Trillians helped jam certain prison sensors with their unique crystalline resonance. A small group of reptilian miners discovered a route through the subterranean cavities beneath the prison blocks. The Vinterans, known for their adeptness at stealth, tracked guard rotations. Bolstered by these developments, Sophia matched each new piece of intel against a mental map forming in her head. While the nights lent themselves to dreams of liberation, the days were filled with humiliating tasks. The prisoners were forced to reinforce the Dominion starport facilities, ironically constructing the very instruments of their oppression. The starport was perched atop a rocky plateau, heavily guarded by drones that soared overhead. A single slip of the tongue could bring the Dominion's wrath down upon any conspirators. So, though the humans remained resolute, they adopted stoic masks of obedience in public, laboring quietly, even as their hearts burned with rebellion. Pressure and fear tested the alliance. A rumor spread that one prisoner cracked under intense interrogation, spilling some details of the escape plans. Panic threatened to unravel the tenuous network. Late-night hushed arguments erupted between those who demanded immediate action and others who called for caution. Barnabas, a grizzled Vinteran, advocated storming the armory as soon as possible. But Wei warned that the Dominion's automated turrets would mow them down unless they first took control of the prison's main security system. Distrust began to simmer, particularly between species that had once been enemies. Sophia, sensing the fragile nature of their efforts, interceded and insisted they focus on their shared desire to defeat the Dominion. Personal grievances would have to wait for freedom. It was a discovery by a taciturn human engineer, Lieutenant Mira Ross, that ultimately gave them a workable plan. While assigned to repair a damaged loader mech at the starport, Mira found a hidden cable duct that bypassed the prison's sensor array. If used carefully, a small team could extract hardware from the starport's communications center, perhaps enough to build a jamming device large enough to blind the Dominion's watchtowers for an hour or two. It wasn't much time, but for rebellious souls, it could be everything. The group decided to use the duct during a routine maintenance shift, counting on the Dominion's belief that the prisoners were thoroughly cowed. When the night of the operation arrived, tension crackled like static in the air. 6 individuals volunteered for the infiltration: Sophia, Wei, Mira, and 3 non-humans: a Vinteran scout named Kamlik, a Trellian known only as Trelshaw, and a reptilian named Murik. Under the dim glow of overhead lights, they wriggled into the cable duct one at a time, hearts pounding. The air was stale, and the heat intensified. They crawled for what felt like hours until the duct opened into a tight maintenance shaft that overlooked the starport's communications center. The room beyond was small but filled with Dominion technology arrays of consoles, blinking lights, and data crystals. Several Thresken technicians monitored inbound and outbound transmissions, only occasionally glancing at the readouts. In an orchestrated burst, the infiltration team dropped down. Wei was the first to strike, dispatching a startled guard with a precise strike to the back of its chitinous neck. Sophia followed, leveling a stolen stun baton at a Thresken engineer, who screeched in alarm. Murik hissed, lunging upon a second guard before it could hit the alarm. Within moments, the team had subdued everyone in the room, though it took all their skill to keep the struggle quiet. Presley's crystalline limbs glistened, humming faintly, as it frantically began copying and extracting relevant Dominion communication codes for the jamming device. Their window of opportunity was brief. Outside, footsteps echoed down the corridor. A patrol. With urgent gestures, Mira stowed the stolen gear inside her tunic. The group scrambled back into the duct, hauling an unconscious Thresken guard with them to avoid immediate discovery. They sealed the entrance from the inside, hearts thudding so loudly they feared it would echo through the complex. Then, they waited, crouched in silence as the patrol scanned the area. After a few tense minutes of searching, the Thresken's moved on, convinced there had been no intrusion. News of the infiltration's success spread quickly through the hidden network. Spirits surged, and pangs of hope rippled throughout the prison population. The next steps would be even more difficult. Building the jamming device, infiltrating the armory, and neutralizing the turrets. But at least now they had a foundation that could blind the Dominion's sensors for a critical slice of time. To keep suspicion at bay, daily life continued under the Dominion's watchful drones. The conspirators performed their tasks with forced placidity. Barnabas hammered in a steel beam with obvious frustration, while next to him, a trembling reptilian nurse, forced to function as a construction worker, stifled tears of exhaustion. The repeated humiliations still wore on them, but a new sense of camaraderie emerged among the species once at odds. They exchanged coded nods, subtle hand signals, anything to let one another know they were not alone in planning the unthinkable. Over half a dozen clandestine gatherings took place in hidden corners of the prison or deep in the sub-level tunnels. At each gathering, they made incremental progress, forging improvised weapons from scrap metal, distributing contraband data chips, and finalizing the sequence of tasks needed for the actual uprising. 3 days before their planned rebellion, the Dominion performed a random cell inspection. A group of heavily armed Thresken guards and a mechanical sentinel dog burst into the block, searching bunks, prying open vents, and scanning for hidden devices with pulsing ultraviolet beams. By a stroke of luck, the jamming device and the stolen codes remained well concealed beneath a false panel in the workshop area, disguised beneath piles of broken metal plates. Had they been discovered, the rebellion would have ended in a flash of Dominion lasers. The tension was unbearable, but the patrol finally left, having found only small contraband items that led to a handful of floggings, a tragic reminder of the risk. The rest of the conspirators grimly realized there would be no second chance after launch. Either they would succeed or they would die. When the time came for the final operation, the conspirators divided into squads. Wei led a technical strike team to the security hub to override the automated turrets. Sophia and Noah took a direct assault group to the armory. Meanwhile, Trelshaw would activate the jamming device at the starport. The Vinterans would coordinate sabotage in the generator rooms, setting up timed explosives. The plan hinged on everything happening in synchrony. Even a short delay could alert the Dominion. In the chaos of the daily transport arrival, Trelshaw glided through the shipping crates stacked near the starport's southwestern entrance. The stolen codes granted them a precious 60 seconds to pass through the security checkpoint before it could register their presence. The jamming device pulsed like a living crystal in Trelshaw's grasp, waiting to be placed atop the main communications spire. With perfect timing, The spire's surveillance cameras flickered out, courtesy of Mira's tampered wiring. Trelshaw scaled the spire, delicate crystalline limbs digging into metal grooves, the device attached with a magnetic clasp. A moment later, a wave of distortion rippled through the local sensors, effectively blinding the Dominion's watchers. Trelshaw leaped back down, heart pounding with an unfamiliar exhilaration. Simultaneously, Wei's team attacked the security hub inside the main prison complex. Exploiting a glitch in the system that they had painstakingly engineered, they slipped inside just as the Dominion's sensor net surprised. Threskin guards reached for their weapons, but Wei's group was faster. Through improvised sonic pulses courtesy of a Tralian crystal, followed up by well-placed stun charges, they seized control of the consoles. Wei's fingers flew across the controls, bypassing Dominion encryption. A hush fell over the group when row by row of turrets turned from green to amber, signifying offline mode. It was done. The terrifying eyes of the Dominion's automated defenses were closed, at least for now. The loudest battle erupted at the armory, where Sophia and Noah led the brunt of the prisoners, determined to reclaim their lost dignity. They stormed the entrance behind explosive charges cobbled together from leftover mining ordnance. The blasts rocked the corridor, sending up a cloud of debris. Threscan defenders scrambled to respond, but the jamming device caused their reinforcements to scatter in confusion, lacking clear lines of communication. In a flurry of close-quarters combat, humans and allied prisoners wrestled, kicked, and struck down the insectoid guards. A reptilian soldier used a stolen security baton to parry a blow, spinning around to slash at a Threscan's joint. Sophia aimed a plasma cutter intended for cutting metal beams and sent a sizzling beam through the thick armor of a guard. The clang of insectoid carapaces colliding with metal floors mixed with the exhalations and cries of those refusing to remain oppressed. The weapons stored in the armory turned the tide further. Humans found star rifles designed to interface with universal triggers. The Vinterans, more agile with sidearms, armed themselves with ion pistols. The reptilians took up heavy blasters that amplified the terror in Threscan eyes. Soon, the air was thick with shimmering energy bolts, corridor walls pockmarked by scorch marks, and the stench of burning metal. Sophia felt adrenaline surge through her veins like never before. The shackles on Surreal, now symbolic, were shattered by the defiant roars of united species. While the Threscan chain of command scrambled, the sabotage in the generator room went off like thunder. The Vinterans expertly placed explosives, tore through key power conduits, and entire blocks of the prison flickered into darkness. Automatic locks failed, and cell doors yawned open, releasing even more prisoners who had not been part of the conspiracies, but who now saw their chance. Flooding into corridors, they overwhelmed unsuspecting guards, seizing more weapons and sowing chaos. The Uprising evolved into a full-scale revolt, with thousands of captives storming the prison halls, unstoppable in their collective fury. Desperate to regain control, the Threscan warden tried to call in orbital bombardment, but Trelshaw's jamming pulses severed communications. With convoys of heavily armed prisoners surging through the starport's perimeter, the Dominion starships were seized or destroyed. In a last-ditch effort, a Dominion battlecruiser in low orbit attempted to land reinforcements. Wei, having reprogrammed the starport's defense turrets, turned them upon the descending craft. Seething pillars of red plasma hammered the hull, forcing the warship to veer off. The battlecruiser retreated, leaving the Threscan's ground side with no hope of external support. As the hours stretched on, the rebellious prisoners expanded their control beyond the prison compound. They stormed administrative buildings, capturing Dominion officers and tearing down Threscan banners. Murik led a small team that reached the planet's central data center, broadcasting an urgent message to the galaxy about the successful uprising. Species once cowed by fear would learn that the Dominion had been dealt a brutal blow on Illyria by slaves who refused to remain shackled. Euphoria coursed through every liberated corridor as sirens wailed impotently. Across the starport landing fields, the newly freed throngs began chanting, a motley chorus of voices united in newfound hope. When the dust finally settled, and the last pockets of Dominion resistance surrendered or were cut down, Sophia stood among an assembly of battered but triumphant former prisoners. Her uniform was torn, her face smudged with soot, and her arms trembling from exhaustion, but she wore an expression of fierce pride that had eluded her through all those weeks of captivity. Beside her, Wei, Noah, Trell Shah, and other leaders of the insurrection locked eyes. The next challenge lay ahead: how to defend this newly claimed planet and use it as a base for a greater revolt across Threscon-controlled space. There would be no illusions. The Dominion would undoubtedly attempt to retake Illyria, perhaps with an entire fleet. But in that moment of raw victory, anything seemed possible. Offers poured in from fresh volunteers, beings who had once hesitated but now saw the potential for toppling the entire regime. Perimeter defenses were reconfigured to bolster their position. Engineers of every species worked together to salvage Dominion technology for newly freed ships. With each passing day, the ill-equipped band of rebels solidified their hold. As the populace on Illyria turned against the few surviving Threscans still in hiding, the new guard set up rudimentary governance. Clinics were established to treat wounded prisoners. Food and supplies were plundered from Dominion storerooms and distributed freely among the liberated. The synergy of diverse talents soon revitalized the battered planet, giving transformative power to the revolution's ideals. Was a meeting in the once dreaded administrative tower, now converted into the rebels' provisional command center, that shaped the next phase of the struggle. Seated around a salvaged conference table were leaders from all freed species. Each had their own scars from Dominion oppression, and each felt a personal stake in eradicating Threscan domination. They recognized that to remain on Illyria would be to await the inevitable counterattack. They needed to carry the momentum outward. Plans were drafted for a multi-septum offensive that would target the Dominion supply networks, inspiring revolts on other prison planets. The sheer ambition of it all was exhilarating, yet frightening. Word traveled faster than any official broadcast. Scattered human outposts, allied Vinteran enclaves, and pockets of Trellian diaspora heard whispers of Illyria's liberation. Secret transmissions began to arrive, pledging support. One by one, small ships risking Dominion patrols attempted to slip through blockades. They carried weapons, food, and volunteers prepared to fight. The rebels cobbled together a nascent fleet using captured Dominion frigates and retrofitted cargo haulers. Pilots stepped up, many with no formal training, eager to strike a blow. Soon, the swirl of starships above Illyria formed a makeshift armada, modest in size but brimming with rebellious fervor. The Dominion's official response came swiftly. A quartet of warships arrived in the Illyrian system, seeking to crush the Uprising and reassert control. Their commanding admiral broadcast a furious ultimatum demanding total surrender. Instead of pleading, the rebels answered with the thunder of massed cannon. Though outgunned, the rebel fleet relied on cunning tactics devised by Wei and the advanced sabotage talents of the Trellians. Half the Dominion warships found themselves blitzed by viral codes that disabled their engines at critical moments. The rebels launched waves of fighters crafted from salvaged parts. In the swirling chaos, the Dominion's commanding admiral realized the gritty determination of these united species had turned Illyria into a death trap for any conventional assault. After sustaining heavy losses, the Dominion warships retreated to regroup, giving the rebels a brief but vital reprieve. Encouraged by this success, rebellions began springing up on other worlds. Illyria became both a rallying cry and a symbol of hope. The Dominion's centuries-long rule now had a significant crack in its armor. Threscan governors discovered their usual fear-based methods failing as entire colonies rose in solidarity. Some previously loyal Dominion vassals decided to switch sides, calculating that the tide might be turning. It took months of grueling negotiations, cross-species diplomacy, and intense battles for the Allied rebels to weaken Threscan control. But each victory fueled the next, as more star systems learned how to sabotage the Dominion from within. In the final thrust of their campaign, an Allied armada comprised of humans, Venturans, Trellians, Reptilians, and other freed species converged on the heart of the Thresca Dominion. Centaur Prime. From the vantage of a repurposed Dominion cruiser's bridge, Sophia and Wei stood watching the star map that displayed hundreds of vessels in formation. Long-range scans showed a formidable Dominion blockade, but the rebellious tide was unstoppable. At a coded signal, the Allied ships unleashed a synchronized barrage. The sky over Centaur Prime crackled with the ferocity of 1,000 energy beams. One sector at a time, Dominion positions fell to the unstoppable wave of combined arms. Though casualties were high on both sides, the rebels pressed onward. The armies they had raised were not just soldiers, they were citizens fighting for liberation, willing to pay any cost to break the chains. When the last Threscan stronghold on Centaur Prime capitulated, the Dominion seat of power collapsed. The regime that had once subjugated countless worlds crumbled under the collective might of those it had enslaved. Jubilant cheers erupted across subspace frequencies. Ships danced among the stars, free from pursuit or intimidation, and news of the Dominion's defeat spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In the aftermath, coalitions formed to ensure no single species would dominate in the Dominion's place. They drafted interstellar accords that recognized the independence of all participating worlds. Much remained to be rebuilt. Devastated planets, collapsed infrastructures, entire communities scarred by oppression. But now they had the liberty to shape their destinies without an overlord. The prisons that once held billions were shut down or converted to living complexes, open to all. Across countless star systems, memorials were raised in honor of the fallen rebels from every species, each monument bearing the same inscription: "We stood together and gained our freedom." On Illyria, the old prison block turned into a place of remembrance. Visitors wandered through halls that had once echoed with screams, now adorned with artwork and stories of resistance. In the same courtyard where they had been paraded as captives, Sophia and her friends planted a garden of blooming flowers that had been brought from different worlds, symbolizing the unity forged by shared struggle. She would sometimes stand in the center of the courtyard, reflecting on how she and her comrades had arrived in chains, destined for a life of servitude. They had been battered and humiliated, but never truly broken. In their darkest hour, they discovered the spark of rebellion that ignited the galaxy. As new governments rose from the Dominion's ashes, Sophia stepped briefly into a leadership role, helping manage alliances and defense. Yet she eventually chose to resign her post and return to Earth, longing to see the homeworld she had fought for. Scores of others did the same, scattering across the stars to find families, rebuild lost colonies, or simply rest after a lifetime of warfare. Some, like Wei, stayed behind to help shape a universal federation, dedicated to ensuring no tyrant would ever again snuff out the light of freedom. The legacy of that rebellion lived on, told by every race liberated from the Threscan regime. Children on distant planets learned how a mere handful of prisoners dared to fight back and spark a movement that toppled an empire. In the new era, alliances flourished, trade routes opened, and reformed Threscans sought to reconcile with those they had once oppressed. Though the scars were deep, the future shone with the promise of cooperation. And somewhere in a quiet corner of Illyria's renewed landscapes, the ghosts of the fallen marched no longer in chains, but alongside the new generation, guiding them to remember what it cost to win their freedom. Yet the greatest testament to that struggle was not in the retelling, but in the countless liberated worlds themselves, where families once torn apart by slavery were reunited, where minds once forced into servitude now shaped new frontiers, and where hope replaced despair in the hearts of beings who had once known nothing but fear. And so the uprising that freed a galaxy continued, echoing through its countless stars, proving that the defiance of the powerless could topple even the mightiest oppressors when their cause was just and their unity unbreakable. The cycle of captives becoming conquerors was complete, marking the dawn of a new age defined not by tyranny, but by the shared yearning for liberty that no chain could ever repress.